Firstly, thank you everyone for joining us for the second of our talk series in collaboration with Support Local Art. The talk is called The Mythical Narratives of the Sri Lankan Diaspora, and we're very, very happy and proud to have Vasantha Yogananthan and Shyama Golden with us to talk through their work and their ideas around this subject. So I wanted to start by giving a little introduction about Art South Asia Project, which is one part of this collaboration. ASAP is a UK-based arts education and development non-for-profit. We support initiatives to widen and deepen the engagement with modern contemporary visual arts from South Asia and its diaspora. ASAP works with institutions and individuals supporting selected research projects, publications, exhibitions, and events. We offer annual grants and facilitate access to wider knowledge networks in collaboration with expertise across the nations of Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka and its diaspora. Support Local Art, hashtag Support Local Art, is a talk series, and it is an initiative organized by Saskia Fernando Gallery to create a much needed platform for conversations on the development of the Sri Lankan art industry. So I wanted to start by introducing Vasantha and Shyama. Shyama, first of all, Shyama Golden is a Sri Lankan American artist with a background in painting and graphic design. Her current work uses self-portraiture alongside yakas from Sri Lankan Toval rituals to give form to a world that exists in her mind. She takes inspiration from these devil dances and exorcism rituals to create work that draws from both mythology and autobiographical reality. She has exhibited at MMCA Sri Lanka, Jeffrey Deitch Gallery in NYC and LA, and Mickey Mang in San Francisco. Secondly, Vasantha. Vasantha is a self-taught photographer who was born in 1985 in Grenoble, France, to a French mother and a Sri Lankan father. Yogananthan co-founded the publishing house Chose Commune to publish the 7-book project, A Myth of Two Souls, from 2013 to 2021. Drawing inspiration from the imagery associated with the Ramayana and its pervasiveness in everyday Indian life, A Myth of Two Souls mixes daily life with staged pictures, combining a wide range of techniques, including color photography, hand-painted photography, and collages. I wanted to, before we get into the fascinating questions that we're going to ask these two wonderful speakers, I would just want to say a few housekeeping points. So the session will take place for around an hour with time for questions after. Please put your questions in the chat and I will read them out, and the panelists should also be able to see it too. We are being recorded and this recording will be put on our website in the next few months. And please note, at the end of the session, it will quickly end and you'll all be out of the session, but it's not personal. So I wanted to start by giving both Shyama and Vasantha an opportunity to introduce their practice to those who are not or may not be as familiar with their work. First of all, Vasantha, are you happy for me to share your
Yes, please.
now? Okay, I'll go for it.
Yes.
Okay. Ooh. Can you see? Yeah, there we go.
Hi, Mala. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to taking part in this talk. I think maybe you can share it like as a slideshow, like full screen option. Anyway, yeah.
Okay. I think I might have to show it like this.
Anyway,
yeah.
I started taking pictures and making photographs 15 years ago. And one way to look at my practice, I guess, would be to explain that I started as a documentary photographer, meaning I would go to places, work with people, communities, and try to reflect on their lives and take photographs in a pretty straightforward way, meaning I would be there with the people and I would not be staging anything. I would be like a witness of what was happening. And I was making photographs with them, often on during a long period of time. So for example, my first project lasted for 5 years with the same people. So there was this idea of being there over the long run. And when I started working on the project, A Myth of Two Souls, where the photographs have mostly been taken in India and Sri Lanka, my practice evolved to a space, towards a space that I would say is the space between documentary and fiction. It might not be only photography, only a photographic space, but I think that the photographic medium, because of its strength and weaknesses, is particularly good at exploring this documentary/fiction space where one can wonder, looking at the photographs, for example, whether they were staged or not, if they are part of a reality that was in front of the photographer, or if the photographer is constructing or reconstructing a new reality based on what is experiencing in the real world. I traveled for 7 to 8 years to India and Sri Lanka, making more than 13 different trips in different states, with the loose idea of finding echoes of the Ramayana in the everyday, in the everyday life of the people. So I was visiting the landscape, the places, the cities, like the deep jungle, very remote places in the countryside, for example, because like the places that were mentioned in the epic, you can still find them on the map today. So I started with these very basic, like geographical locations, and taking like a road trip from like the north of India, the border between Nepal and India, to Sri Lanka. I visited this location that that are very important to people still today, and because they are linked to the Ramayana. So, for example, there are a lot of places where, if you are Indian or Sri Lankan, you should go there at least once in your life. Many people believe that, because like you have to see for yourself what the place looks like in reality, even though the place was mentioned in the Ramayana, and the Ramayana is also a fiction. Looking at the landscape and the people who live in this landscape, I think is at the center of the Myth of Two Souls project. And I've been making pictures for this project using very different approaches, meaning that, for example, the picture where we see the woman lying on the floor, like, for example, it's not staged, although it looks like staged. And many other pictures like look like they've been like taken as a snapshots almost, whereas like they've been carefully constructed. And this is the case of the riders on the motorcycle, for example, where I would find a particular place like that I find interesting, and that was a good visual tableau, and I would then wait, for example, at the corner of the road for someone to show up, and I would speak with the people, and we would make a photograph together, and the resulting photograph is what the people give to the camera, what the people like decide to do in front of the camera, meaning I don't really direct the people, I let them be actors in some ways, and we do photographs together. And many photographs in the slideshow you're looking at are hand painted. I collaborated with J. Kumar Shankar. He is a painter from New Delhi in India. And hand painting photograph is, of course, is a well-known practice in South Asia, and there are very few painters still in activity today, because, of course, like they're lacking jobs, and it's not something that's very much alive. And the idea was to, by making some of the photos adding to the prints. Like, it brings the photograph to a space that is, again, leaning towards magic realism and leaning towards fiction, because the colors are slightly surreal. And again, I think that by mixing real color photographs and hand-colored photograph, it blurs like the line between documentary and fiction. I could go on and on, but I'm gonna hand it over to Shyama, and we'll speak further when we continue talking together.
Thank you so much, Vasantha, for sharing and being so generous with your time to talk about your practice. I mean, I'm sure everyone in the audience agrees that those photos are absolutely magical and gorgeous. I'm going to share, Shyama, I'm going to share your presentation now. And I'm going to start. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Shyama Golden. I am primarily a painter, but I'm trained as a graphic designer. I did graphic design for 10 years. And then during that time, I was always painting, but just for fun. And, it was over the past 5 years, I've been working on this series of paintings that are inspired by yakas from Sri Lankan folklore. And I'm kind of putting them into scenes from my everyday mundane life in Los Angeles. And that's today, but formerly I was in New York and Texas, and that's kind of like going backwards in time. So these first paintings are starting off in scenes from Texas. Like, this was inspired by my road trips across the country by myself when I was in college in West Texas, driving, it takes 8 hours to drive across just the state of Texas. So it's kind of a lifestyle over there. And there's, a kind of comedy of errors in some of these early paintings. This one is based on my apartment in New York City, and all the little details are from things that actually happened there. I just feel like, reality is stranger than fiction. Truth is stranger than fiction a lot of times. So I like to incorporate a lot of esoteric details from my life. I guess we can continue moving through. And this one's also from Texas, clearly, but especially driving through Texas, you just see a lot of odd things, like these water tower. There's a water tower that has a smiley face painted on it, and these power, what do you call them? Like the cell tower signal things that are disguised as trees, and a lot of details that I feel like are just very American. I'm always trying to look at what makes something American, because a lot of times it's just got such a strange quality to it when you look at it from like a outside perspective, which I feel like I can do. Like, I feel like I'm able to kind of switch in and out of not being able to see these things and then seeing them, as an outsider as well. And this one is based on my neighborhood in Mount Washington in Los Angeles. And again, I'm always using these characters, these yakas from folklore. That one's it's Mahasona and Pandampali in these two, and you'll see them repeated over and over again. And this is another scene from my neighborhood with the cars, and like all of those are like real places too that you can go to. And I think there's been a progression with the work. You can tell that it's changing over time. The earlier paintings, basically the yakas replace me, and they do kind of almost act as there's always self-portraiture in the work. The earlier paintings, the yakas replaced me, and I think that was maybe parallel to me sort of identifying with my own weaknesses and problems directly. And then I think this is sort of like the phase 2 paintings that we're looking at right now, where I'm not identifying directly with them, but they are, there's something that I'm able to see as separate, and confronting them in this way. And then the third phase is something that I'm working on right now, which I'm not showing yet here, but it's where I see myself. The yakas are kind of like a human mirror of myself, and they're not to blame for my problems, but that I'm treating them with care and, trying to heal them and carry them with me. And I think those are all just metaphors for things that are going on in my life, just to give a background of where these come from sort of psychologically.
Great. Would you like me to keep sharing them, or?
I think we got through them.
We got to the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you so much, Shyama. They're also, both of you are brilliantly talented, so it's very exciting to see these works. Obviously, part of this talk is the mythical narratives, but part of it is also identifying as Sri Lankan diaspora. And what I really wanted to ask you both, it might be a short answer, but you're both connected with Sri Lanka in various ways. What is your relationship with the island? And when did your relationship start?
Should I go first? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was born in France, and I had like 100% French upbringing, meaning that my dad was not speaking Tamil at home. And at the time I was growing up like the north of the country, and particularly like the Jaffna Peninsula, where the family is still living, was closed to foreigners and to tourists, so we couldn't travel to Sri Lanka. I first visited the country when I was 18 years old. And I think one of the only thing that it's not Sri Lankan, it's Indian, but like the thing that I remember from my childhood is that like my dad had the Amar Chatra Kita comic books, and I couldn't read English, of course, but I was fascinated. I don't really know why by the comic books, so I would like look at them and flip through the comic books. So it's interesting because I think that there are some pictures that stay with us, pictures that you would see in your childhood, and unconsciously like they stay there. And I think that as a photographer, when I started the project A Myth of Two Souls, I was like 28. And to me, visiting Sri Lanka again, not really again, but maybe for the first time as an adult, as a human being, as an artist, it was very important for me to go there and do something meaningful, and not only travel the island. Having said that, I think that for me it was also very difficult to go there with the pressure of making photographs not right from the start, but going there as a foreigner, an outsider, not speaking the language, and creating pictures there. Like there was a lot of dots when traveling there, and I think at the time I wasn't really sure if allowed to make pictures in Sri Lanka. I think I did it because I was really young. I still am, but I think like when you're a young artist, like there is this energy and not naivety, but like I guess you just do things when you feel you should do things, and this is, I think, what I did in Sri Lanka when I traveled there.
Yeah. Basically, my parents left Sri Lanka in the 80s and came to Texas. Actually, no, they were in Chicago first, and they were in so many places. My dad started in Hawaii, and then they were in Chicago, and then Texas, and then they had me in Texas. And they were there to do their postgraduate studies, and they really never wanted to settle down in the US. So they kept trying to move back to Sri Lanka, and they tried to move back when I was like 2 years old, and we stayed there for a while. And then, that didn't work out because they said I wouldn't drink the milk there. There's always some reason that's funny. But then they tried again by sending me to live with my mom's brother's family we were very close to. And they sent me to live with my mom's brother's family and my cousins and, aunt and uncle there. And I went to school at an international school for 2 years in the late 90s when I was like 12 or 13. And that, then I could speak Sinhala, but I was like at a second grade level. So, it wasn't good enough to be in the public school there. So then my parents brought me back. And then a third time they tried to move as they retired, and it was, just too late. They were too used to living in the US. But when I was living with my uncle's family, he was, he has a small printing press that's attached to his house. That's the family business. And so I watched him design, fonts and typefaces and, typeset books. And I think, he probably subliminally influenced me to start my career as a graphic designer, because I didn't really, have anyone in my family who did painting or the kind of art that I make now, but he definitely was an influence on my career as a designer, which still influences me today, that education that I had. And and I'm still like close to that side of my family because I lived with them as well. And these days, I haven't been to Sri Lanka in a minute. I really need to go, but it does take 48 hours to get there from the US. So and it's always a very big trip when I go, and I try to stay for like a month or so. But yeah, that's basically my relationship to Sri Lanka in a nutshell.
Thank you both. And obviously the relationship is different with both of you, the different entrance points. But you're also situated in LA and France. And I think it's really interesting to think about, what does it really feel like to be a diaspora artist that here, well, not here, but I'm saying because I'm in Europe as well, Europe essentially, as well, but on the island, and how can we think about the label of the Sri Lankan diaspora, and how do you think you relate to it, and how does it relate to your practice? A long-winded question, so choose the part you want to answer.
Yeah, I guess things must be very, very different in the US than in France. But for me, I would say like it's really difficult. Like I feel it's never gonna go away, meaning that, for example, I currently have an exhibition in Paris at the Henri Cartier-Bresson Foundation, where I'm showing a new series I've been producing in New Orleans in the US. And there was recently a piece in Libération, which it's one of the biggest newspaper in France, and the piece literally starts with Vasantha Yogananthan's name is difficult to remember, blah, 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 blah. And we are in 2023 in France, So it's like I'm constantly referred to my roots or to my name, and sometimes you have the feeling that people are not really looking at the work, that they look first at your identity or what you're supposed to represent for them as a product, of a French mother and a Sri Lankan father. I think I don't have any answers. I think it's very it's a difficult questions and a difficult world to navigate when you live in the West and you come from different backgrounds, and you always sometimes I feel that when I was younger, I always tried to explain things, and now when I feel that people are very dumb, I don't explain things anymore, because I'm just you should they should grow up, they should listen to the ongoing conversation, they should educate themselves, because we're not the only one who should be educating them, it's complicated, I would say. But for example, just to finish, I was talking about France, but I'm my gallery in London, the Photographers Gallery, who have been showing this body of work extensively, the response in the UK and the way people look at me as an artist, as a human being, is very different again. So I think that France is very particular, in the sense that there is belief in France that we are all equal. There is no need for this like positive action for people who are like underrepresented minorities. You know, like it's more or less the opposite of what's happening in the US. It's a very opposite thinking of what's happening in the US actually. So it's interesting to look at both countries in the sense that they're not looking at the issues in the same ways, and how do you address these issues, and how do you move forward.
That's really interesting. I mean, in the US, sometimes there definitely is tokenism where like corporations or something will use people of color to clean up their image or something. But what I have found as a positive thing more recently, but also throughout the past 10 years, is that I've found a lot of support from the Asian diaspora in general, and especially Asian women as well, because a lot of my mentors and people have helped me, or not just Asian, but also also Black Americans and like people of that feel outside in many different ways, have really been supportive of my work, and I think that has made all the difference, and I think that that's something really positive that's happening now, and even I could say the same about being given this platform to speak here, that we're giving each other the opportunities instead of waiting for the dominant culture to give us representation. And I feel like those are the places where some of the best collaborations are happening, the best conversations are happening, and that I've felt the biggest boost. And a big show that I was in was called Wonder Woman, and it was in Jeffrey Deitch Gallery in both New York City and Los Angeles. And this is one of the most prominent galleries in the US, and the show was organized by Kathy Wang, who's Asian American woman, and every artist was from the Asian diaspora, women or non-binary artists. So I feel like it was really us helping each other that has moved the needle the most. And that's happened a lot in recent times, just basically like opening the door for other people as we, find our way.
Yeah, it's very different. It's very interesting. Yeah, I think in France that like the people who are like maintaining the like status quo, like there's this thinking that once these people will be gone, let's say in 10 or 15 years, because like they are around like 50 years old, for example, that the new people who are going to come in are going to change things, and that organically like things are just going to get better. But we know that's not going to be the case, like you need to change things, like especially if you know that the system is not functioning properly. Like you shouldn't wait for the system to change itself.
And it definitely comes into that idea of like you're only really like the dangerous idea of validation on which stage, I think. And just as you said, Shyama, like this is why platforms like the platforms Art Mama and Support Local Art, but also the spaces in South Asia is so important to do the platforming, because they can do the same work. You don't have to wait for Venice to come knocking on your door. These platforms are as important, if not more. Kind of thinking on this point, I think you've both briefly touched on it, but I think it's really interesting to think about where you've exhibited the most, which seems to be in Europe and America, and how are your works received in that region versus how they received in South Asia, and what are the different kind of points of reading that you've experienced?
Shyama, you want to go first? I feel I always go first.
I'm sorry.
So go first.
Yeah, I think I don't know if there's a stark difference between the two readings, because it's very personal. Everyone brings their own, personal reading to it. And certainly, it's not a monolith on either side. But I think I have noticed that, you know, anyone who has, I mean, people of I think many diasporas respond really strongly to my work, because I think they see this commonality of being in between two different cultures. And it's really interesting to me to hear people's individual interpretations of the work. Like my cousin Dilanka was looking at some of the work, and you know, he grew up in Sri Lanka. You know, he's from Sri Lanka but lives in Italy, you know, temporarily. But so he kind of understands what it's like to be an outsider in that way. And he said that for him the work feels like the sort of the illusion of the American dream, which is interesting because that wasn't something I was intentionally putting into the work, but it's something I think about a lot. So I think that's the coolest thing when I hear something that I'm thinking about, but I didn't know I was putting in the work, that people are reading through it. And I think, yeah, I do notice that there's such a range of reactions to it that people bring based on, because you just see, you know, what your experiences bring to the work.
For me, I think it's difficult to know, like, for example, like what people think about my work in India and Sri Lanka. I mean, I do have Indian friends. I don't know many people in Sri Lanka, for example, or people who are working in the arts. I think that when I was making the pictures for A Myth of Two Souls, I feel that one thing I was really trying to avoid was the notion of exoticism, because it's been very much linked, like the relationship between photography and India, for example. You know, like when you look at Steve McCurry's pictures, or like what the photographers from National Geographic were producing in India. And some of these past pictures are quite problematic, in my opinion. But for example, like there's always been this idea that India is the land of colors, for example, and that these colors are always very bright and very saturated. But this is not what I was experiencing when I was traveling. So this is why the color palette in my work is like really like somehow muted and with a lot of pastel hues, tones, and I think that I was like the landscapes where the photographs were taken. I was always trying to select places that would be the most banal, you know, like like places where one would not stop to make a photograph, because like these are places where like there is not really anything like nice or beautiful or specific to look at. There's no temple, there is no nice architectural buildings, you know, like it is all like, it's mostly like the vernacular kind of small villages, you know, like the kind of houses or shacks or small shops that you would like notice traveling on the road, for example. And I wonder if in the West people have been reacting to the work very positively, because like the way I make pictures is heavily influenced by European paintings, and because it's what I've been looking at the most, because I'm a failed painter, like not that I tried to be a painter, but like I look at paintings much more than I look at photographs. So I think it's an important point, because you're always inspired by other artists. And in my case, like I'm inspired by painters. And when I was younger, I think I was, looking at a lot like the famous French painters, for example. And so the way they would be framing pictures, the way they would use colors, it has stayed with me the same way like the Ama Chitrakatha comic books have stayed with me. So when I was traveling to Sri Lanka, like I was looking at the world and looking at South Asia with a Western artist view on the world, I think, like more than an Asian one. That being said, because like the experience I was living was in Asia and India and Sri Lanka, like these two worlds were were mixing up somehow, you know. So that was really interesting for me.
I feel like the internet now, there's less of a divide of that viewpoint, even because everyone's influenced by the same images now, you know, more so than when we were growing up. But today it feels like there's just, for better or worse, you know, we're all looking at the same images.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I remember, like, I don't know, it is in the US or in Sri Lanka for that matter, but in France, when you know, like the school, like they take you to museums, you know. So for example, if your family don't really go to the museums, like the school is the first place where they will bring you to the museums, and they will make you sit in front of a painting, for example, and try to teach you, learn new things about like how the painters were using colors to convey like feelings or emotions. And the painters I was looking at were like Bonnard and like the Fauvistes like Matisse, and you know, like all the famous French painters. Whereas today with Instagram and with the internet, of course, I'm looking at pictures created by artists from all over the world.
But arguably there's still a lens or a filter on what you're seeing, and based on your position. I don't think we all see the same internet and the same Instagram.
Not exactly the same, but
yeah,
but it's definitely, compared to, you know, when we were growing up, it was definitely more of a divide, I think. I mean, it's still certainly Western dominant, though, even everywhere, I think, what gets shown.
Yeah, we're all victims of the algorithm in a way. As obviously a huge part of this is both your abilities to do amazing work in storytelling. And the reason I wanted to connect you both in this conversation is because of the strong, very strong myths and folk legends, and in your case, the religious stories that go through your works. Could you talk about the inspiration behind these stories and mythical figures, and also why it's important for you to use storytelling in your paintings and photographs?
I can go. I think, yeah, for me, before I started doing this series with the Yakas, I was kind of working on paintings that were one-offs about like different things, because I wasn't working as a professional artist. I was, you know, still designing, and so it was more stuff I was doing for fun, and I wasn't going really deep into any one topic, you know. I was just doing whatever idea would come to me at the time. And then 5 years ago, when I started this series, it was really me thinking about, what can I commit to, you know, what is like one thing that I can commit to exploring. And I was thinking about what can I bring to the table, like what is my specific experience that, you know, someone else might not do, or no one's going to ask me to do. And you know, because previously I had also done work as an illustrator, and I got tired of doing things people were asking me to do. I wanted to do something no one would ever ask me to do. And so I thought that, you know, I was thinking about like, well, what's the dominant thought in my mind at this time? And like what was going on in my mind was this sort of preoccupation with this idea that I'm, you know, not qualified to be an artist, or can't see myself as a, you know, as a fine artist kind of thing. And so it was this self-doubt that I was like, okay, well, what if I just really explored that feeling, because it's a really visceral feeling. And so I started to think about, you know, how to give form to those self-doubts, and not just self-doubts, but like any kind of patterns of things that I don't like about myself, parts of myself that are repressed. And they don't have to be negative things, but I just started to think about the idea of yakas, and how people, you know, dancers in the toil, in the exorcism ritual, dress up as yakas and impersonate your own demons leaving you in a way. And I thought this could be an interesting way for me to act out my own drama that's going on inside of my head. So that's basically how it started. And it felt like a world that I could explore deeply. And I have been, for a long time. So it's been really helpful to me in that way.
Interesting. Because I am a photographer, like I think things are really different for me. At that point, I should mention that the first trip I did in India was in 2013. And at that time, I didn't know that I was going to walk around the Ramayana. I only knew that I wanted to make photographs in Sri Lanka and India, and photographs that would not be linked to any documentary topics. So that was the starting point, but I had no clue of what I would be doing. And during that first trip, I traveled to Tamil Nadu, to a small town called Rameswaram. It's actually like the closest Indian town to Sri Lanka. So when you go to the tip of the almost island, on clear days, one can see Sri Lanka. Like I think it's 40 to 50 kilometers away. Anyway, I traveled to Rameshwaram, and then there's one small bus that takes you to Dhanushkodi, a very, very small fisherman village that was partially like torn down after like kind of tornado or tsunami like in the 60s. Only a few fishermen still live there, and there is no electricity, no running water, like very scarce, very tough conditions of living. And when the bus drops you at that point, like if you walk another hour and a half, you reach like the tip of the island. And when I reached the tip of the island, there were many, many people there. And I spoke to the people, and they were all telling me about the Ramayana, and that this is the place where Rama crossed the ocean with his army and the monkeys, and to go make war to Ravan in Sri Lanka. And I was really amazed. I mean, because like there were like hundreds of people basically staring at the sea on an empty beach, and the beach was looking like any empty beach one would see in Sri Lanka or India. But because they were thinking like that this was where Rama was crossing the ocean, like somehow the place had like a deep meaning for them. And many of them were traveling, from UP, from BR, like 3, 4, 5 days of train, all to India to go to that beach, to that empty beach. And this is where the project really started. I think for me, like, because I learned there that what was happening in these like nondescript locations was much more interesting than the festivals linked to the Ramayana, or like the holy places everyone visits, for example, So like these places that are most often like in the countryside, in the jungle, were really interesting to me.
And you both, when we spoke yesterday, spoke a lot about, we talked about positionality already, about where we are situated, and how the Yakas and the Ramayana, although they're South Asia specific, have a very universal myth, kind of core myth. It'd be really interesting to kind of hear your thoughts a bit further on what we spoke about yesterday and why that's important.
Yeah, I think with the Doil ritual, a lot of cultures have, similar types of rituals. And certainly they, probably originate from South India, but even before that, way back, it could be Africa. Like we don't know, because they're thousands and thousands of years old before we have accurate written history. So there's like literally a common thread that many of us share with it. And also you can just see by looking at a lot of the mask cultures in Asia, they have such similar designs, and also in Africa. And even, I've even seen some European cultures have similar costumes. I mean, it's pretty incredible that either they independently all came up with that, or that there's some shared thread. But either way, I think there's some really fundamentally human thing about these rituals, because so many of us share a history that's similar. And even if you don't specifically, know that that's in your lineage, I think we all have these images in our mind in some way that they have a familiarity to them. And I think that's the reason that people have resonated with them.
For me, I think that storytelling was first and foremost a very meaningful way to interact with the people I was making photographs, because when traveling in India and Sri Lanka, I realized that, of course, everyone knows the Ramayana, and oftentimes like people have favorite characters, for example, or favorite scenes from the stories. So that was really fun, not to make pictures of people's everyday life, but rather ask these people to do something that would be out of the ordinary, meaning that, for example, when Sita gets abducted by Ravana, he takes her in his flying chariot, and they fly across India to Sri Lanka, and there is this big bird named Jatayu, and he tries to kill Ravan, to rescue Sita. And I was working in a small fisherman village, and one day I meet a fisherman, and he had this t-shirt with an eagle on the back of the shirt looking exactly like Jatayu, so I spoke with him about the story, and then he embodies Ravan in a way that only he can do, meaning that he knows the story, and I don't even need to tell him, oh, you should try to do this or that, he was just there, and reality made him wear a t-shirt with an eagle on it looking like Jatayu, and we did the picture together. And this is a good example where what I would experience in the real world would lead to pictures that are both fictional and documentary somehow, because the picture is still shot at the fisherman's village in front of his house where he lives, with the people nearby witnessing the scene and making fun of him, for example, so this was all grounded in reality. But in the end, when one look at the pictures, of course, one doesn't know the backstory of the picture or the making of the picture. So one only sees a man strangely looking like he's fighting with someone in the air.
I think it's really interesting that you brought in this idea of fiction and reality as well, because as Shyama said, these stories go back thousands and thousands of years, and also from our background, I mean, the South Asian kind of storytelling tradition is through all histories, and it's that what gets lost and what gets added, and these kind of passed down inherited myths that some people do take as fact and use as a reason for doing something that's may not be completely above board. But also it's just important remembering that these are stories, they're not real, but the way that you both manipulate them is so fascinating.
Yeah, we all need stories, don't we?
Yeah, and there's so many different ways to interpret the same stories too, and that's why some people will use them, for political means that might not be, the most helpful. But I think there's also just a lot that you can infer about, histories, because in a lot of these old texts, Sri Lanka was described as an island, populated by demons, and that probably was just, our ancestors that didn't look the same as people from the north of India or something. So, you can infer some things about the past, which I find are interesting, because those are things that are still happening today all over the world. But then those ideas get integrated into the local folk religions and then change over time. And the culture is constantly changing too. That's the thing. It's like there's this sort of Orientalist stereotype of Asian cultures that are just the same forever and preserved, but in reality, they're constantly evolving because culture is a living thing. So there's so many dimensions to it that I think are interesting to explore.
I think for me, especially what made me start the project, I think was when I discovered that there is, of course, not one Ramayana, but like 300 Ramayana, to quote A.K. Ramanujan, and especially the Ramayana like that were like rewritten by Tamil writers or by Sri Lankan writers, depict Rama and Ravana in very different lights, and that was so interesting to me, that these Ramayans were like showing all the bad actions or bad decisions that Rama took in his life, especially in his relationship to Sita, and how Ravan was like fell in love with the wrong girl, you know, like, and how like these two characters that I think in the north of India might be seen as good or bad, in the south of India and in Sri Lanka, like the story is much more nuanced and layered and complex and more interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And there's definitely a similar thing with some of the stories of the yakas as well, because some of them are, you know, depending on what town you're in or who you ask, that they're not necessarily these like pure evil, like demons, like the way that in the West, you know, we have just like Lucifer or something is just the pure embodiment of evil. But it's just a lot different in Asian cultures, that we have a lot more complicated characters. Like they might help you. Sometimes they might cause mischief. They might teach you something. There's, and like, depending on who you ask also, it's going to be a different story. So I find that really interesting, that they don't have a fixed definition. More like people, you know, just like people.
Yeah.
We're not pure evil or pure good either. And that's why I find them relatable.
Definitely. I want to I'm going to open the Q&A for questions, but I will ask more questions while people are putting their questions in. There's a Q&A at the bottom, so if you do have a question, please put it in. And while we're waiting for those to emerge, I wanted to ask one kind of final question. So obviously we've talked a lot about defining your relationship and identity in terms of Sri Lanka. It's complex. What are your relationships with the Sri Lankan art ecosystem? For example, Shyama, you're currently part of the Foreigners exhibition in MFCA Sri Lanka. And I actually don't know, Vasantha, if you've had a show in Sri Lanka or you've had all these works have been shown there. It'd be interesting just to kind of, we talk so much about your way you're working with Sri Lanka and your work, but how does Sri Lanka work with you essentially?
Yeah. Do you want me to go? Well, I mean, for me, it's my first museum show, period. So it means a lot to be recognized in Sri Lanka first. I mean, that will always be my first museum show. So I feel like that's important to me, that the work be received there, because if it was getting lots of recognition here, but it didn't make any sense to people in Sri Lanka, then I would feel like I'm doing something a bit, you know, I wouldn't be sure, you know, if I was hitting the right audience, because I do want it to, it doesn't have to be for every single person, but I do want it to resonate with the culture that I'm borrowing from, that I'm taking it from. So yeah, it's important to me. And it means a lot. It's felt really nice to see the reaction from the show at MMCA.
I've never had a show in Sri Lanka.
Wow.
And I'm very lucky because I'm working with Traveri in India, and they're doing such an amazing job. I mean, first and foremost, like the lineup of artists are people I really admire. So it feels really great to be in company of such great artists, even when they do like fairs, like the way like art works, like sculptures, photography, paintings, like enters in a creative dialogue is very interesting. And we did that show in Mumbai. I think it was well received, and it's a bit of a bummer, I think, for me, because also like I'm a bookmaker, and here in the West, making a book as an artist is so interesting, because you can make a book and it will cost like 40 euros or $40, and pretty much like almost anyone can buy it, you know, like it can be donated as a present, it can be under a Christmas tree. So it means that it is interesting, because then you're not only speaking to collectors who can afford to buy a print, but you can speak to literally everyone. But of course, a book that costs 40 euros in the West it's still a price that is too expensive in Asia. So meaning that the books are not really allowed to circulate outside of dedicated libraries or bookshops, you know, programs that are like creating like libraries where like young artists from like Mumbai or Delhi or any big cities could go and browse to like photo books, for example. So someday, maybe, I hope.
Printed
Hopefully
in Sri Lanka.
hopefully someone in the audience will take that take that forward. We've talked a lot about artist books and that expensive, like how can you bring those to South Asia without that price tag? That's really interesting to think about that. I think we will do an art murmur about that in the future. We have one question which is for Shyama, and do you think that using Yaka, and maybe I'll rephrase it, any thoughts about using Yaka as a kitsch subject?
Well, I'm not sure what the question is asking exactly, so I'll have to take a guess. Does it mean is it a kitsch subject?
I wonder whether it's asking if you are using it as a kitsch subject, or whether you could use it as a kitsch subject.
I think I know what I can say to this, because you know, the Thoil ritual, it is, you know, it is scary and it is dark, the actual ritual, but it also definitely has a comical aspect to it that does feel, you know, certainly camp and kitsch. So I think that probably does come through a little bit in my work, even though the aim isn't to be completely kitsch. I think that there is certainly like a levity in the work that comes from the original mood of the subject matter that I'm referencing.
So that's I think there's also a comment in the Q&A for you, Shyama, if you want to have a look at it. But it's no need to read it out.
Okay.
I don't know if we have any further questions. Oh, we have one. Okay. A very long one. So I'll start reading. Both of you touched upon operating outside the mainstream art world in some way. And historically, as South Asians, I feel like we haven't had control over the narrative of our culture, especially in the West. Do you ever feel like you needed to fight for control over the narrative and how you interpret your culture without notions of primitivism or Orientalism? Hard question, but you take your time to think about this.
Well, I mean, I think for me, I feel that I'm the first one responsible, because when I come back from, like when I was coming back, for example, from India and Sri Lanka, the way you work as a photographer is that you make pictures in the field, meaning that it's one part of the job, let's say, and then when you come back to the studio, like the second part of the job starts, and it is actually maybe the most difficult one, and the one that is certainly taking you a very, very long time, compared to, let's say, you spend 1 month making photographs and you spend a year editing and sequencing the photographs that you think you should show to the world, you know. And even if you want to escape exoticism and all those things, like sometimes you're gonna fall into it, you know, like you're gonna like there are traps everywhere, and when one learn how to recognize a picture that should not be shown, even if it is a good picture, then it means that you're doing your job on your hand. And I think this is where I would start, and meaning that when you get a museum show or a gallery show and there is a discussion between you and the curators about like the pictures that should be hanged on the walls, then the discussion continues. Meaning that if, for example, in one book of mine, I have 50 pictures and we can only show 10 pictures in the show, you have to be really careful that these 10 pictures like render an accurate view of what you were trying to do, showing a series of 50 pictures in the book, because works can be turned and twisted to say different things, of course. So I think you should, you should always fight to be in control and stay true to the story you want to tell, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard because those things are, you know, sometimes it's like the image itself isn't the problem, it's the fact that it's a pattern where that's the only image being shown, right? So it's a challenge to make sure you're just aware of how things might be being misrepresented, and make sure that for myself that I'm not adding to that misrepresentation.
Yeah, context is very important. Like the picture is important and the context is as well.
Yeah, right. And if your pictures are taken out of context, that they could, do something you're not intending.
And we did talk a bit about like that idea of the work being instrumentalized or tokenized for a purpose, and that comes into where you both need to be so careful with how you show the work as well, to prevent that tokenization and using these images that is so well thought out by you in the wrong way.
Yeah, I think that the context, like what it's being shown alongside, also matters, that it's in the same spirit. And it has been really helpful to be shown in the context of other Asian diaspora artists as well, because actually we all do work that's so different that it doesn't feel like you're looking at a stereotype or any one idea that people have of what our art should look like.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think for me, like a good example is that 10 pictures, like 8 pictures are actually on show at the new photography center opened at the V&A in London. And it was very interesting because like the curators and I, when I was approached, like when my gallery in London was approached by the V&A, and the V&A wanted to acquire like a group of pictures from the Myth of Two Souls project, and they had the funds to buy 10 pictures. So what, like it was really interesting to have a conversation about like the 10 pictures that should be representing like such a big project. And how do these 10 pictures work together as a group of pictures? And if the V&A, for example, presents only one picture in a group show, or does that one picture also work as a single image? So these are really interesting questions, and I feel that a lot of curators are also doing a very good job, meaning they're listening to the artists and we have conversations, and we pick the pictures that we feel are the most important.
I think that we've got a lovely comment from Shamini Pereira. Thank you, Shamini. That's a really lovely place to kind of end on. She has said, it's an honor to be able to show your work, Shyama, at the MMCA Sri Lanka. And we are very committed to be showing work by artists who are living and working in Sri Lanka and outside the country. And it's important to put for us to put this stake in the ground early on with the foreigners. We are still a museum in the making, but we honestly believe that artists like you and Vasantha and platforms like ASAP will ensure that we start to become the center of our own map and lead the narrative. So cheers to becoming the center of our own, well, for Sri Lanka to become the center of the map. And a huge thank you to both of you for being so generous with your time and to really giving us so much to think about. And I feel like I was making notes and will be, especially the idea of the masks going through. And I've been to Rameswaram's. Yeah, I've been there before, and I must have remembered that story before when I was taken there as a child. I also wanted to thank the Faisal and Shabana Foundation, without whom this talk series would not be possible. And yeah, have a lovely evening and day. And my final thank you, of course, is Saskia Fernando Gallery for being the wonderful brains behind Support Local Art and being the best collaborators to work with. We have one more talk, which will be happening at the end of July, and more details will be out on that soon. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and a huge thank you to Shyama and Vasantha too. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.